Welcome to another edition of the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. I'm Don Grodoff. Along with my wife Gina, we have a practice called Focused Healthy Family, helping families get past the behavior and anxiety issues naturally. We also produce the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, where we are advocates for our own family and others dealing with OCD and anxiety. In the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, we do interviews, provide resources, and information for treatment and support of OCD recovery. We also want to hear from you, your comments, and if you want to tell your story, we want to put it up on the podcast on our Stories from the OCD side. Our goal in these podcasts is to raise awareness of and advocate for the recovery from obsessive compulsive disorder, better known as OCD. Now, before we get to that podcast, let's hear about our sponsor.
Today I'm here to talk about Q Science's sleep spray. Q Sciences has a number of different sprays. There's a melatonin sleep spray that contains melatonin, 5-HTP, and L-theanine. We've used other melatonin products to help our children with falling asleep. Melatonin is something that occurs naturally in our body that helps us quiet and calm down for sleep. And yet I really feel like I've seen a difference in the spray versus other products. Our youngest is here to talk about it. What things did you like better about the spray versus the other things?
I don't like the chew tablets because they leave like a weird taste, and they're mainly like they also have like you get bits in your teeth.
Okay, so Q Science's spray.
It's a lot better, I'd say. The taste is pretty decent and it works well.
Okay. I'm happy with the quality of these products and how they're helping our whole family. If you'd like to learn more,
simply go to qsciences.focusedhealthyfamily.com. That's the letter Q, sciences.focusedhealthyfamily.com, or visit invisiblewheelchair.com and find out more information there.
There are a lot of supplement products out there, yet you want one that's of good quality. Check out Q Sciences for your family.
Now, let's get to that podcast. This podcast was recorded February 11th, 2022. This is podcast number 65, How to Talk to and Support Someone with OCD. Now, today I'm bringing this up because as I've been thinking about how I've worked through things with our own journey with my daughters through their OCD, I realized, there are things you do differently with someone who is dealing with OCD. Now, today I'm really emphasizing or talking about OCD, but this really can hold true for someone who is dealing with anxiety, someone who is dealing with other types of disorder. There's things that you say and do differently with them than you would with a neurotypical child, let's put it that way. And I think one of the first things that I want to get across in this is I think it's important to understand that there's something really truly going on in the brain. What I find sometimes in working with parents is that one of the parents of the couple doesn't really believe that there's a problem. One of the things I find too is children with special needs a lot of times are very brilliant. A lot of times they're old souls too, and so the parent looks at that and believes that, well, they're smart enough, they should be able to get through this. Or they think that they're just being ornery or obnoxious and their behavior needs this change. And that's really not true. We have to understand what's going on in the brain. Now, I found this piece and unfortunately didn't write down the source of it, so I apologize for this anonymous source. But I found this and it kind of explains what I'm talking about. Researchers know that OCD is triggered by communication problems between the brain's deeper structures and the front part of the brain. And these parts of the brain primarily use serotonin to communicate. This is why increasing levels of serotonin in the brain can help to alleviate OCD symptoms. However, even though researchers know that low levels of serotonin can cause OCD symptoms, there's no laboratory test to diagnose OCD. It's just the front of the brain, which is the amygdala, that area, the frontal cortex, I believe it's also called, is what I call the receptionist of the brain. It's the first received signals come to the front part of the brain to be able to discern what to do with them, and that front part of the brain is not talking to the other parts of the brain, at least not in a good way. And it's trying to communicate, and it becomes a looping kind of message. It's almost like it keeps trying, I think. It's what it, I'm talking kind of non-scientific here, but it's kind of like I want to get this message to the other part of the brain, but it just won't get it. So it loops it and loops it and loops it. And I think it's important, first off, to have an understanding that these things are a real problem in the brain, and that it's not just a child being obnoxious or whatever. And understanding that can make it easier then to know, to be able to handle it. And it's very important to handle, I think, to handle it responsibly, compassionately. So one of the things I learned especially, and I had to learn it the hard way, I was I was very resistant to it. When my first daughter went through it, it was really tough. She was very angry, very abusive, all this kind of stuff. A lot of battles that happened. And I resisted. I had a hard time with it. We weren't going to clean the room at 11 o'clock at night, or burn everything in a bedroom because she had touched it or somebody had touched it or something had happened. And so I would fight it. I would work against it. My language was terrible. I was telling her, hell no, we're not going to do that. Just stop doing that stupid stuff kind of thing. It was not something I'm proud of, but it was a tough intro to it because it came in all of a sudden for us. It was in a pandas kind of version. So it came on strong, came on quickly, and we didn't know what to do with it. Didn't even know what it was, what we were going through. And one of the things I did learn was that you can't talk logically in that situation. Logic really doesn't work well. You have to learn how to converse. You have to I've developed this idea, and I work with different parents using this idea. I call it the compassionate coach, because one of the things that got me to the place of changing how I communicate, changing how I respond and act around my daughter with OCD, was my wife telling me, you've got to remember that within that little beast that's approaching you, and at the time she was it was tough, is your daughter, your loving daughter, who before all of this happened was this bubbly, happy-go-lucky little girl, and had daddy wrapped around her finger. And so it was really hard for me to lose that, because at some point she was unable to to touch anything or to have anybody touch her. In other words, we couldn't hug her, we couldn't hold her when she was upset, etc. So I had to learn how to talk and act around her very differently. One of the first places was really listening to her feelings, this fine line of reassuring. Because with OCD, one of the things I've learned is that you don't reassure them, that they seek reassurance. I think I think every form of OCD does this, seeks reassurance. You know, my daughter used to follow me, my oldest daughter used to follow me around after she came out of the bathroom, asking me if she had washed her hands properly. Did I wash them? Did I wash them enough? Did I did it? And she would literally follow me around, walk around. I couldn't get away from her, asking me over and over and over and over whether she had cleaned her hands good enough. And it took me quite a long time to really resist doing anything with that, because you get to a point where it just gets so annoyed. It's just, so I think there's a point where you can listen to their feelings, but do it in a way that doesn't necessarily pump up or reassure them by just saying, I understand you are really upset. I understand that you really want to have reassurance about your hand washing, but you don't have to reassure them. I know that you want that. What we used to be able to say was, I know that's what you want, but I can't do that. That is not helping you. You might think it is because you demand it, but it isn't. So you have to really be careful of that. You want to listen to their feelings, because many times, she would come out with her feelings, and the people I've worked with, they will get their feelings out, and you want to be able to accept their feelings. And again, just being very careful not to reassure, because one of the big parts of this is they need to get past this. They need to work through the ERP, the exposures themselves. Not you can't do it for them. You don't want to boost up their compulsions. You don't want to do their compulsions for them. I call it compensating. And here again, I think it's important to understand when you're dealing with ERP, exposure response prevention. And if you don't know a lot about that, you might want to listen to, do a search on the invisiblewheelchair.com website. We have done quite a few podcasts on ERP, exposure response prevention. But you want to understand, one, that they have to do it for you. And you really don't want to compensate by doing their compulsions for, or helping them with their compulsions. Now, here's a caveat to it, and one of the things we learned from our own experience, we had a point where we had to do some compromising, some compensations. We worked out with my first, well, we've worked it out with both daughters to, with my daughter, we had to come to a point. She had so many. She was her compulsions were getting so strong, and there were quite a few of them. That what we did was we had to make an agreement that she would start working on her exposures, the ERP, and we would continue to compensate on some of the other stuff as long as she was working on her exposures. And she was having to do exposures 2 to 3 times a day, every day for weeks. This compassionate coach idea is about being what I call a positive cheerleader for them, not a military drill sergeant. And that's the way I always kind of, classified myself when I first started, was more like a military style, even though I've not been military. My father was, he was in the Navy, but I've not been in the military. but I came across very strong. No, we're not going to do that. That's stupid. That kind of really poor language. When in truth, what we need to be is that, like I say, the positive kind of cheerleader for them, using positive language like, "You can do this. I know you can. I understand it's difficult, but let's talk back to that bully." You know, Sometimes it doesn't hurt to name that OCD. My We used to name it Voldemort. It was back in the day when Harry Potter was first came out, and so we kind of used that terminology. But people I know call it bullying. I've seen a lot of different perspectives on calling it names or not. I actually had Dr. Hoffman. I interviewed him on the podcast, and he came up with this different way of looking at it. He said, think about OCD as the overprotective kind of helicopter mom who is really just worried about you and wants to make sure that you get what she's saying. And I thought that was really interesting because I've heard all kinds of different versions of what people, bully was a big one, monster, bully, bad guy, bad girl, whatever. So there's a lot of different ways to think about it. And so, like I said, though, the big part of it is being the positive coach, being the one that cheers them on, that says, "You can do this. I know you can. Come on, kind of thing." And one of the other big things, and this is with any kind of communication, my wife tends to remind me of this one quite a bit. Less is more. Less words. Being able to say things in few words and shut up and listen is really important. I think it's also important for parents to talk to each other, to kind of come to an agreement, come to a compromise of how they're going to do it. Based, a lot of times based on what the therapist's plan is, come to an agreement, come to an understanding of what each of your roles is in this and how you're going to do it. See, because it is difficult, because I know even in our relationship there were a lot of times when I thought I knew better how to do it than she did, or she thought that she knew better than I did. And I think the important factor there is to decide a compromise way of doing it. Maybe I'd like to talk about it. In other words, communicate between yourselves and be compassionate with yourselves as parents, to know, because it's a tough job, and to know that it's nice to have parenting as a tag team. When one gets tired, we used to do this. I'm done. Your turn. Our battles were pretty long and pretty hard. Not everybody's are like that, but to work like a team, to know when the other one is just exhausted and can't do it anymore. Maybe you're the husband and you're at work all day, and the wife has to deal with it during the day. Make sure that you are able to find a way to help her at night. And I say this man woman thing, but it's maybe it's a woman that's gone all day. Either way, whoever might have to be there all day dealing with it. The person who comes home in the evening or late afternoon, talk about how to deal with that. What do you need from me to do? So I think that to me is a very important part, being a tag team, knowing when the other one needs help. I think the other important part for parents is self-care. Understanding that you have to take care of yourself. It is so easy, I guess easy, I don't know if that's the right word to use here, but it's easy to get into the pattern of caring so much about that child that you neglect yourself. You kind of rank it, in priority. That OCD, the child with OCD might be first on the list for the attention. And then maybe the other kids come in next, and you might fall, third or fourth even. The dogs might even be above you. I don't know. But you really want to make sure to take care of yourself, because it is vital because when you become so exhausted and burnt out, then you are not able to do what you need to do to help them. And of course, now I'm thinking this is needless to say, but finding a good therapist, you really have to have that. Someone that can be there to help you, someone that can guide this. You also probably want a psychiatrist. It's important here, though, when you get a psychiatrist or a therapist, but really you need both, because you may need to get into medication with this, and a psychiatrist is the one that has to handle that. So you really want to, and you can listen to a podcast I did on finding a therapist. I think I just did it recently, in fact. Just do a search on it for therapist, and that should come up on the invisiblewheelchair.com website. But you want to find one that understands OCD, how it works, maybe even has had it. I've had a couple of therapists on the podcast that have actually gone through the OCD themselves, so they understand it. They know how it works. Plus, you want to make sure that they know how ERP works. And you may want to look at ACT therapy, acceptance commitment therapy. And again, there are podcasts up there on the invisiblewheelchair.com website talking about ACT. We've got a couple of therapists I've had on there talking about that. So it's important. It's important to find the therapist. The other thing, we talked about self-care for the parents. We also have to find a way to give some attention and care to the other kids, because they do suffer too. One of the big principles that we talk about is when one suffers in a family, the whole family suffers. Maybe not to the degree of the person, the person with OCD or the person with the disorder might, but it is pretty strong. There's a lot of anxiety that builds up within the family. It's important to address that too. It's important to let the children know that you still care for them. You can be truthful with them. It is exhausting and it's tough, and the person that's dealing with OCD takes a lot of your attention, and that you're not doing it because you love them better or that you don't love the other kids. Let them know that, right now, I'm going to try to give you attention, try to give you what you need. You have to let me know. You have to ask me, though, especially when you're in need, and I will do my best to do it. But it is going to be a little tough right now because I've got to give my attention here, because your sister, your brother, whatever, is suffering, and we really want to help them too. But I want to make sure that you are taking care of yourself, and if you need something, I'm here for you, and I will try to give you attention. So I think it's important to have that dialogue, help them understand what OCD is like. I remember with my oldest two kids, this was, might have even been before my youngest one was born, but my oldest son and my middle daughter uh, were oil and water. My oldest is on the lower end of the autism spectrum. Asperger's really is what but they've kind of gotten rid of that for some reason. And my daughter, of course, had the OCD. Those two didn't mix well. And so they had a really tough time and would get into battles and fights a lot. While my daughter with the OCD tended to pick on my oldest child, and I'm going to use the word abuse. It wasn't as bad as that word sounds, but it picked on him a lot. And at one point with them, I sat them both down and had them talk to each other one at a time, asking you know, to my oldest son, I would say, okay, I want you to sit and not say a word. I don't want you to respond to this at all, but I want my middle daughter, I'd said to her, I want you to tell your brother that when he does, and I can't remember, this behavior, whatever it was or is, what does it feel like to you? Tell him what you go through when that happens. And she did. It was really pretty interesting. She, you know, well, he does this, and I get so much anxiety. I can't remember upset or anxiety over it, and it just I makes me want to do this, and this. And he listened, and I said, okay. Did you hear? I think I asked him, did you hear that? And he said yes. And I said, now I want you. I told her, I said, I want you just now to listen, and I want you to say, when she does this, you feel this. And I got them to feel what was going on for each one. And for my son, my oldest son, it was hard to catch that feeling. He wasn't one to be able to interpret someone's feelings as well. So for him, he was able to then really hear it and understand it better. And I thought it really helped the two of them communicate better with each other. It didn't mean they didn't ever fight again, but they did come to a better place with it and were able to deal with each other better and got along a lot better. So um, I guess one of the big things I learned too, I had to learn how to communicate, what words I could say, how to be that cheerleader, how to change my own. Here's the big here's the big. You gotta deal with your own baggage, your own stuff, because a lot of what she was doing, I was taking personally. It was triggering me, and I had to really realize that to know and change myself. And I'm still working on that. That's a long, lifelong process. Um, and I had to learn to stay calm myself and not take it personally. We both did. My wife did too. Because my daughter would come at me with some pretty tough stuff, just anger and screaming at me, and even sometimes telling me, "You're not my father. I hate you," and all that kind of language that at first I really took in personally and would rebel against, or it would really depress me. It would be either rebel against or depress me, and I had to learn that I had to stay calm on my side. I had to hold up on my side of it, no matter what she was coming at me with. And it was very difficult to learn. But when I learned that, what would happen before would be she'd come at me with this kind of thing, and I'd come back at her with right back at her. And I always talked about it, we kind of like climbed the wall of anxiety together, and it didn't get us anywhere. It just led to hour-long, 4 or 5 hour battles that were exhausting and all of that. And what I learned was when I stayed calm and I didn't respond back or react back with the same energy and intention, firing back at her with the same that if I stayed calm, yeah, hers would still go up some, but we didn't go up together, and it didn't go up very far, and it came back down. And then let me make a distinction here too. I don't always mean that I didn't necessarily meet her energy, but I didn't fire back at her. I didn't attack back. It was different, you know. Sometimes I wouldn't. My energy, I would just keep calm and say, "Wow, you're really upset," you know. And sometimes, if she was really coming out with a high energy, kind of a, I would go, "Wow, you are really upset." You know, I'd kind of match the energy, but in a good response versus an attack response. And you have to kind of know when, because you know, if they're really coming with high energy and angry or whatever, if you come at them with you know, a calm, you know, oh, you're really upset kind of thing, they might interpret that as patronizing, or that you're really not listening, you really don't care. Whereas if you match their energy but respond in a good way, like, wow, you are really upset about that. I can see it. That kind of gives them the idea that you're paying attention. So you have to kind of play that, how to respond, whether it's calm, real calm, low voice, or you match their energy. But and again, all with good responses, not attack back kind of responses. I hope that makes sense. But I think it's very important. So, you know, it's really a matter of remembering and holding true to who that child is. You know, one of the other messages, or the concepts that we kind of teach and work with parents on, is that behavior is a foreign language that we don't understand. And I'm going to go just kind of briefly into this, but I'll probably maybe do another podcast on it. Is that in reality, the behavior is not the real problem. It's the underlying issue that's causing the behavior. That's the problem. In other words, behavior is a language. It's a communication of a problem. You know, when my daughter would come at me with this anger and this behavior, this, you know, abusive kind of violent behavior, it wasn't the behavior that was the problem. The problem was the what she was going through in her mind. It was extraordinary. She used to say, you know, she used to have to, a lot of times she'd watch TV a good bit of the day and even into the night, because she said when it got quiet, her mind would reel with, I think she said, thousands of messages, you know, or these messages, and they would loop and loop, and they were not good messages. They were, for her, they were dangerous messages of, and deadly messages of, if you don't do this, somebody's going to get killed or hurt, family member, or, you know, they were really tough. Sure, this was my oldest daughter. My youngest one, her messages aren't as um, deadly, or whatever. They're very different. Hers was a very different process. She doesn't go through quite the extremes of anger and all that my oldest did. And I think some of my oldest daughter's anger was due to the fact that we didn't know what we were doing then. We didn't know how to respond to things. So I guess I'll leave you with this message that it's a tough place. Dealing with OCD, dealing with any kind of anxiety is a tough place for a parent, because it's understanding and always holding in your mind that this, even though this child is coming at me with this or that, and it's really tough stuff, this is still my loving child, and that behavior that they're showing is just, I'd say 99% of the time, is really just trying to tell you there's a deeper problem going on, and that they're still your loving child. They just are trying to communicate with you. You know, even kids that are acting out, that don't have OCD but are acting out, there's a lot of other things that might be going on. It might be a parent that's so controlling that the child has no ability to handle their own life, and so they act out to try to gain some control over their life, to try to gain some of their own personality, their own person. So always remember, try your best to stay calm in a situation and see through it to the child that's within, and then try to figure out what's going deeper than that. Listen to their feelings. I always say a simple response to their excitedness or their anger or whatever is to really simply say, wow, you are really upset over this. Tell me a little bit more. And then shut up. Now, I'm not saying you say that to them. I'm talking about yourself. The parent says that. Wow, tell me more. And then the parent shuts up and listens. Really listen without trying to fix it. You can fix it at some point if they want you to, but you really want them to do it. So understand that even though that child with the OCD or the anxiety, that their behavior is not it, that they're still that child. There's just a problem that's deeper than that. So I leave you with that thought. I hope that this has helped you in some way, shape, or form. Like I said, you might want to look back and do some searching through our archives of past ones, talking about the ERP or talking about these other things we've mentioned in here. So you take care, and again, hope this has helped. This concludes this podcast. We hope you will subscribe if you haven't already. Remember, we would love your comments, or if you have a story to tell, we want to put it up on the podcast. Simply go to invisiblewheelchair.com to do that. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest, we love guests. So simply go to invisiblewheelchair.com and contact us from there. Gina and I are here to help you or your family get to a better place naturally. Simply visit focusedhealthyfamily.com for more information. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Keep tapping and focusing forward for a better way.